In Pittsburgh, 3 firefighters die in the line of duty, bringing new urgency to the search for the cause of a mysterious blaze. 2 suspicious fires strike East Baltimore in the same week. Perplexed investigators try to draw a connection. To catch an arson suspect, investigators in Reno must rely on evidence from the crime scene. But what kind of clues could survive the 1400-degree inferno? When fire strikes, it's sudden, unexpected, and rampant, consuming almost everything in its path. But through forensics, arson investigators can piece together what's left and raise the truth from the ashes. Some fires start purely by accident. Others only seem that way. It's the investigator's job to tell the difference. In 1995, the urban landscape of East Baltimore was plagued by a series of mysterious fires. In July, firefighters arrived at 1311 Rose Street to find the row house completely engulfed. No one was living there, but the fire claimed 1 casualty. A vagrant had taken shelter that night in an upstairs bedroom. The intrusion cost him his life. The Rose Street fire was the second lethal fire in the neighborhood in days. Less than a week earlier, neighbors reported a blast that tore apart a narrow building a few blocks away on Lombard Street. Bricks and debris flew 50 feet from the explosion. A woman who lived next door went into cardiac arrest as a result of the explosion and later died of complications. The Baltimore police and fire departments called in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to examine the suspicious fires. Agent James Tanda led the investigation for the ATF.
This was a massive explosion. These are 3-story brick row homes on Lombard Street that are contained on both sides. This unit happens to be in the middle of the block, and when it exploded, the entire building collapsed, and the fire was devastating. If there was anybody else in there other than the arsonist that day, they would have never survived this.
2 suspicious fires, 2 structures reduced to rubble in the span of a few days. The ATF suspected they may have been connected to something bigger. Over the past few years, 13 fires in nearby buildings racked up more than $2 million in damage.
I think it was just...
Yeah, it was committed.
Now that fires had claimed 2 lives, the investigation took on new urgency.
Any kind of odor? Is there anything noticed?
Fearing they were dealing with a serial arsonist, the ATF and the Baltimore Police Arson Squad sought to determine whether these blazes had been intentionally set and if any connection could be drawn between them. Baltimore arson investigator Mark Profili, a criminalist with the Baltimore Police, was assigned the case.
People wonder oftentimes how you can take a bunch of rubble and find evidence, and we believe that fire doesn't destroy evidence, rather it creates it.
So, Bob, we're gonna need some shots in here.
Okay. This is where the guy's body was found, Sal.
The victim of the
down.
Rose Street fire succumbed to smoke inhalation in an upstairs bedroom.
Face down on the floor, head toward the back door, the back window. Okay.
But the fire had come from below and worked its way to the second floor. The investigative team's objective was to find out exactly where it started. Fire always marks its path. Smoke and burn patterns are the first clue at any scene. As the flames move through a building, they leave distinct patterns, which can lead a trained eye to the point of origin.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Investigators need to know where a fire started before they can determine what caused it.
Carpet. It was a big fire.
Ready for a new angle?
Yeah. Point of origin is that area of the fire, the exact point where the three elements of a fire would come in together. That would be fuel, heat, and oxygen. And that would be the area, from a forensic standpoint, that we would look for the physical evidence of flammable liquid residues being poured.
What investigators found when they examined the floor was a circular area that had been burned much deeper than the surrounding wood. The pattern suggested that this was the point of origin.
One, I can even say this suggests the person taking the gasoline and
The
pouring
wood
it,
had been soaked with a flammable liquid, an accelerant, at this spot.
making her. The hard edge burning, where the alligatoring effect of the wood stops, is a good area to collect samples. This sort of defines where the pour would start and finish. Also, the burn through and the tongue and grooves would show us that probably a flammable liquid was poured here. What makes me believe even stronger that it's a flammable liquid is if you can follow, you see the damage when the floor comes around and goes out, spreads all the way across here, which to me suggests that perhaps our arsonist poured some flammable liquid, small amount here, walked towards the front door, threw the flammable liquid in a large area, sets the can wherever, lights his match, and exits.
As the investigation continued at Rose Street, the ATF called in a specialist. Tipper, a dog trained to sniff out traces of accelerant, set to work. She helps investigators identify similarities between arson fires by locating where flammable liquid was poured. With a sense of smell 200 times more sensitive than the human nose, these dogs can pinpoint minute traces of accelerant.
Where's it at? Find it. Seek here. Seek here. Good girl. Seek here.
This drastically reduces the time needed to test samples collected randomly.
Where's it at? Over here. Good girl. Good girl. Seek. Come here. Get here. Get here. Here.
When Tipper finds what she's looking for, she sits down and puts her nose onto the most saturated spot,
Good work. Good work. That's good work.
telling investigators precisely what evidence to gather. Samples are then collected for analysis.
Okay. Fingers. Okay.
Cut that up and fit her in the can. That's perfect.
Accelerants ignite with devastating ease, but are reluctant to burn away. If the wood hasn't burned to ash, traces of the vapor will remain locked inside.
Pine. This pine right now.
Water from the fire hose actually seals it inside the material.
In these scenes, we collected burned wood from the points of origin of the fires. We also collected any burned pieces of wood or clear pieces of wood that Tipper, the canine, hit on.
Okay.
Sections of wood are carved from the remains, placed into paint cans, and firmly sealed to prevent evaporation. Oddly, tipper kept hitting on a portion of the hallway that didn't appear to have been affected by the fire. Samples from this spot were sent with the other samples to the Baltimore ATF lab. In the lab, evidence cans are pierced and a pipette filled with activated charcoal is inserted. If accelerant is present in the sample, it is absorbed by the charcoal as it vaporizes. The charcoal is then tested for any traces of accelerant. Analysis confirmed that gasoline had fueled the Rose Street fire. Samples collected throughout the house showed that it wasn't just splashed lightly about. The arsonist had probably thought that more gas meant a bigger blaze. But that's not the way fire works. Though the arsonist had accomplished his goal, he was not an expert in the ways of fire.
You have to have that fuel-air mixture correct for the fire to burn at its peak as best it could. And they just put too much gasoline in. They didn't have, maybe not enough windows open, maybe something, but they just had too much in here.
One of the biggest clues was the unburned patch of floor found by Tipper. The ATF found traces of accelerant, but it was faint and far from where the blaze occurred.
Show me.
Someone had tried to torch this building before.
Show me better. Good girl.
Could Tipper's curious finding put investigators on the trail of an arson ring?
See?
In the center room.
Tipped off by their canine specialist, investigators discovered that 1311 Rose Street had burned before.
Jim and I was on.
2 years earlier, the building's owner, Robert Milligan, had received several $1,000s on a fire insurance claim.
Any money on this?
No, not to my knowledge.
Baltimore police interviewed Milligan, a businessman who owned and operated a number of low-income rental units.
Serious as far as how?
Well, it doesn't appear to have been normal.
He told the investigators that the fires may have been set by his tenants, who were angry over recent eviction notices.
Quite a coincidence.
Meanwhile, an investigation into the explosion on Lombard Street indicated that it, too, was oversaturated with gasoline. But in this case, the gasoline was spread with a bug sprayer found at the scene. The high concentration of aerosol gas is what caused the explosion.
That's where the dog hit up here.
It seemed the arsonist had tried to refine his technique.
It looked almost like a trail.
The Baltimore Police Department's arson squad questioned residents, hoping to locate a suspect.
Officer Sinclair, Baltimore Police
Hi,
Department.
nice to see you. Are you telling them about what happened?
Residents of Rose Street reported that they had been evicted just before the fire broke out. Neighbors near the Lombard Street explosion saw men moving furniture and files from an office in the doomed building, then moving in cheaper desks and cabinets. The more questions the police asked, the more suspicious and similar the fires became.
My house was on fire, just like you knocked on my door. It was on fire.
Looking through fire department records, detectives learned that too much gasoline had also been used to start a fire on nearby Bradford Street in June 1995, on Gough Street in April 1995, and on Linwood Avenue in October 1994.
Chances are they came all the way over to the...
They were paid over
13
$30,000.
similar arsons had occurred in a 2-mile radius in the past 2 years. Every fire fit the same profile. Too much gasoline poured in the middle of the floor.
From the time they did Gough Street, it was in April of '95, until Bradford Street was just 2 months. It was April to June. And then from Bradford Street to Rose Street was within days. They actually literally went from June 28th to July 1st to July 4th to July 10th. So in a 2-week period, they did 5 arsons and attempted to do 5 more.
Besides their location and their fate, on the surface, the buildings had little in common. They were owned by different people. Months after the spree of fires ended, investigators hadn't closed in on a suspect, but they felt confident that all 13 arsons had been motivated by the same individuals. Now they had to find them.
And what we tried to do was draw a link between this and all of the other scenes, and we were able to do that through their lab. We were able to find consistencies in how each one was initiated, as well as the accelerant that was used from scene to scene was all consistent.
If this were an arson for profit scheme, it would take a massive paper chase to uncover it. Police and ATF started with a background check on Robert Milligan, owner of the Rose Street property. They learned he was in deep financial trouble. His businesses and rental properties were failing. His debt exceeded $60,000. Investigators researched every property that Milligan had ever owned. The names of known criminals kept cropping up as his business partners. The next step was to find out if any of these other men had buildings that burned. Using bank statements, corporate records, and fire department, police, and insurance reports, investigators slowly pieced together a string of insurance payoffs that linked Milligan and his business partners to all 13 fires. But who was actually striking the match? The investigation revealed that one of Milligan's business associates was recently imprisoned for robbery. Agents went to the Maryland Correctional Institution to interview him. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he admitted his involvement in the arson for profit scheme. He named another business associate, Paul Beber, as the torch. Beber had been injured in the Lombard Street explosion, he said. The informant told police that Beber had modified his usual pattern, using a bug sprayer to saturate the Lombard Street house. He thought it would be a quick job, but he underestimated its power and was temporarily trapped in the flames. Beber managed to escape and flee with the help of Robert Milligan's brother, Gary.
Crawled out of the rubble with 2nd and 3rd degree burns and crawled back through the alley to the awaiting getaway car. At that point, Gary Milligan then picked him up and took him back to his house where they tried to doctor him before he went to the emergency room.
As soon as Beber was released from the hospital, he went into hiding.
This is where the witness saw
He was eventually flushed out, apprehended, and arrested.
To the getaway vehicle. He was surprised, very surprised that he was caught, that it was over. He was very surprised. He had been running for so long and had led a life of crime since he was 16 years old, that at the age of 32 to be apprehended, knowing that he was charged now with arson, conspiracy, attempted murder, and a bunch of other crimes, he knew his life was essentially over.
To close the case, the ATF had to find a way to link Robert Milligan to the arson scheme. A sting was set up. In this surveillance video, he's discussing the arson with his former business associate, who cooperated with authorities under condition of anonymity.
Everything's cool, right?
With me. Yeah.
I mean, can you find out with Bundy if anybody knows anything about me, or if anybody's coming to see me?
Listen to me carefully. They told Paul that they know that I'm the mastermind behind it all.
It was all the ATF needed.
We pay rent. We ain't going nowhere. I don't care. No.
Police learned that Milligan hired men to evict his tenants a week before the Rose Street blaze.
Don't believe them lies. Don't believe them lies. We ain't got to go nowhere.
Once he was certain the house was clear, Beber set the fire. Milligan didn't count on a vagrant becoming trapped in the building. Milligan even had police on his payroll to ensure that his people would not be caught. But in the end, his arson for profit ring collapsed. In November of 1996, federal indictments charged Milligan and his 5 co-conspirators for their roles in one of the largest serial arson for profit cases in Maryland history. By April of 1997, all the defendants had pleaded guilty to arson, conspiracy, and federal firearms violations. The judge doled out stiff sentences, ranging from 17 to 24 years in federal prison. Milligan and his associates tried to cover their tracks, hoping that the power of the fire would destroy any link to them. But forensics had connected the 13 seemingly unrelated fires with the people who masterminded them. Had it not been for good police work and effective lab analysis, their elaborate arson ring might have never been exposed. Other arsonists are less methodical, but catching them can be equally challenging. On November 18, 1992, firefighters from the Reno, Nevada Fire Department were called to a large fire. The blaze tore through the Mental Health Medical Association building. It took firefighters more than 10 hours to conquer the blaze. The fire destroyed the 3-story building and the expensive medical equipment inside. The intensity of the fire seemed suspicious. Forensic investigator William Stevenson was called in to photograph and examine the wreckage.
This would be one of the first photographs taken at the scene. It's an aerial photograph of the actual building itself. The area just to the west of this porch, or towards the residence itself, was the area that the fire investigators indicated was the possible point of origin for this fire.
Once the fire had been extinguished and the building declared safe, Fire Inspector Bill Burney explored the aftermath. He suspected an accelerant had been used.
And I thought it was highly unusual to have so much water on the porch to see flames burning on top of the water.
A typical house fire burns around 800 degrees. But judging from the burn patterns and amount of damage, temperatures at the entryway reached 1,400 degrees. Neither an electrical fire nor spontaneous combustion from oily rags would have produced these patterns. They were clearly signs of an accelerant. They included a well-defined pore pattern and severe alligatoring, indications of intense heat in a short time. Burney and Stevenson looked for something to link the arsonist to the crime scene. Despite Stevenson's careful documentation of the fire damage, no compelling clues surfaced.
The destructive capabilities of the fire had actually burned up a lot of evidence. And when I left the scene that day, we had virtually no physical evidence to connect a suspect to that scene.
That wasn't surprising. The intensity of the blaze made it impossible for firefighters to enter the building, so the order came to flood it from the outside. After a 10-hour dousing with thousands of gallons of pressurized water, most of the accelerant had been washed away. Investigators focused their attention on the front door, the apparent epicenter of the blaze. Near it was a shattered window. Bernie suspected that was where the arsonist poured the accelerant.
I determined that the point of entry, how the fire was set, is the suspect used a flammable liquid container, probably a 2-gallon or 5-gallon gasoline, and broke a window and used this motion to pour gasoline through this window, therefore possibly cutting the back of their hand or some portion of their hands.
If Bernie was correct, then whoever broke the window may have been cut in the process. Could the arsonist have left blood at the scene? It seemed unlikely. Even if he had been badly injured, the evidence would have been washed away or covered with grime. While the investigators scoured the building for clues, their big break came from across town. Investigators Bernie and Stevenson were frustrated by the lack of evidence at the Mental Health Association building in Reno.
Fire started way down here low, so that's another indicator.
But just as they finished their inspection, they learned about a shooting at a mental health facility in another part of the city. Doctors who had offices in the burned building also worked in this facility. From interviews with personnel, the investigators zeroed in on a suspect in the shooting, James Thomas Manassas, a 57-year-old cab driver who lived 5 blocks from the fire. His wife, a psychiatric patient, was institutionalized at the facility.
Stronger if she's home with me.
He believed that after 2 years, she was only getting worse.
She has been making great strides.
I want her to come home. Calm down. She has to come home.
Growing frustrated, he directed his anger at the doctors, whom he considered responsible for his wife's decline.
No, I'll take care of her. Calm down, sir. I will take care of you.
Your wife.
He demanded that his wife be released, or he threatened to take matters into his own hands. Doctors refused. For nearly 2 years before the fire, Manassas continued pressuring doctors about his wife's care.
I'm sorry, you cannot see her tonight. You know when visiting hours
According to one of the psychiatrists, Manassas made death threats and promised to burn down the building.
You understand. You know the rules.
No, I would like to see my wife tonight.
Is everything all right, Dr. Keel? Waving that gun around.
On November 18th, just 5 hours after the arson at the mental health offices, someone had fired 2 shots through the windows of the mental health facility, wounding 2 doctors. Whoever fired the shots fled without being seen.
From where you were standing, what did you see?
Police decided to take a closer look at James Manassas.
Standing in front of me.
Officers went to his house and found him bleeding heavily.
Up on Cleveland Street.
Both of his hands were severely lacerated. He was brought to police headquarters for questioning. Manassas claimed that he was wounded with a knife during a mugging the previous night.
We went out to this location in order to try and verify the fact that he had indeed been attacked here. and look for possible physical evidence of that attack. When we arrived at the area, we did a very close examination, and we did not find any blood anywhere around this particular location.
Look at that. Yeah, that's a nice picture there. Let's get a shot of that.
Armed with a search warrant, investigators returned to his house. They found a streak of blood on his car door and several spots of blood inside the vehicle. In the house, they found that Manassas had made no effort to conceal the copious amounts of blood.
Oh, we got some blood here. Get a shot of this.
In the kitchen, they found blood at the bottom of a bucket. In the bedroom, they uncovered bloody pants and a bloody towel.
Oh, yeah.
Given his suspicious wounds, weak alibi, and ardent threats against the mental health care facilities, the police felt they had enough cause to arrest him. Bernie and Stevenson believed they had the arsonist in custody, but they knew that they didn't have the kind of physical evidence that would assure his conviction. There had been no eyewitnesses to the crime, and no accelerant was found on the suspect's clothing. But his wounds raised suspicions.
In reality, Reno PD detectives believe that these lacerations were actually caused by the action of the broken window glass to his fingers at the fire at the point of origin.
The only physical evidence to connect him with the scene of the fire would be blood from his wounds, if it survived the inferno. Stevenson was familiar with a laboratory technique in which bloody fingerprints are baked to stabilize them. Was it possible that a viable droplet of blood had been preserved by the intense heat and survived the water and soot?
Right by his left foot all the way over to the door.
It was a long shot, but at this point, it was all they had.
Because of all of the hundreds of thousands of gallons of water that had been used on that fire, the actual damage by the heat and flames, damage by the char and the residue, and the items falling from the ceiling and such, we were a bit skeptical as to whether we would find some blood evidence at that scene.
If there was any blood at the scene, it would have been baked into the concrete. The investigators removed 6 inches of burned debris. Then they gently washed down the front porch. As layers of wreckage were moved, a series of brown droplets that appeared to be blood became visible. A marker was placed on each drop. The blood droplets led from the shattered glass down the porch steps. Not knowing how much of the blood would yield helpful information, they collected as much of it as they could. Samples wasn't easy. Normally, blood is collected with moistened cotton swabs, but these droplets were much less accessible. The team had to use a scalpel to scrape it from the concrete. The only hope of catching an arsonist was to find his signature in these charred flakes of blood.
There it is.
The blood samples collected from the burned steps of the mental health building were sent to the Washoe County Sheriff's Office crime lab for analysis. The serology department did a preliminary examination to confirm that the blood was human. The specimens were then sent to criminalist Rene Romero to determine if viable DNA could be extracted from them.
We really didn't expect to get results. The stains themselves looked like something that came from the bottom of a charcoal grill. And high heat is something that can ruin DNA.
In fact, the heat had been very destructive. But despite temperatures in excess of 1400 degrees, Romero was able to extract DNA from 3 of the 11 samples. The next step in profiling the blood droplets was RFLP, the most complex DNA test. It's most often used when the sample is in bad condition or is too minute. By exposing the DNA to radiation and using a series of radioactive tags, a DNA profile can be determined. The test took 3 months to perform. The RFLP process worked on only 1 of the 3 DNA samples. The bar pattern it generated was then compared to that of the blood drawn from James Manassas.
Walk right out towards me, right in front of you.
Was 1 in 500.
Romero's statistics estimated that the frequency of this particular genetic pattern is 1 in 500,000. The population of Reno is just over 80,000. The slim but powerful DNA evidence had survived the crucible of a devastating fire and bound James Manassas to his hostile act. To Bernie's way of thinking, Manassas was a man who wanted attention for his crime and sympathy for his wife. It seemed like he was a man with an agenda.
Basically, I think he was playing with us, or myself, to see how long he could prolong being arrested, and he wanted to be noticed. He was a vigilante. He wanted everybody in the world of the city of Reno to think that his wife, who was being treated at the mental health facility, wasn't being treated correctly.
For his crime of arson and the shooting attack on the clinic, James Manassas received 76 years in jail. With a gallon of gasoline and a match, Manassas' stunt evolved into an enormously costly crime, totaling $4.5 million. Fortunately, the fire claimed no victims. The ultimate price is paid when fires turn fatal. Shortly after midnight on February 14, 1985, the Pittsburgh Fire Department was dispatched to 8361 Bryceland Street. Captain Thomas Brooks, firefighter Patricia Conroy, and firefighter Mark Colenda entered the house and made their way down a staircase to the basement. When the stairwell collapsed, they found themselves trapped with no apparent way out. The intense heat and blinding smoke prevented them from finding an exit. Their hose burned in half. Their radios failed. As the fire continued to rage, the oxygen in their tanks ran out. It took several hours to extinguish the blaze and evacuate the fallen firefighters from the incinerated home. Brooks, Conroy, and Colenda could not be revived. None of the Buckner family, who rented this house, were injured in the fire. Because the fire turned fatal, the Pittsburgh fire inspector contacted the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Special Agents Dan Bay and his partner Bill Petratus were assigned to the case.
Anytime you have a situation where 3 firefighters die or a firefighter dies, it's a very high priority with ATF as far as the investigations go. They requested us in the early part of the investigation, actually right after the fire, to make a determination on the cause of the fire.
The agents tried to discover how these firefighters had died. The house, typical of the Pittsburgh area, appeared to be 2 stories from the front, but was actually 4 stories, built into a hill. This layout contributed to the firefighters' disorientation, they failed to notice their passage to safety.
They didn't realize that this door could be opened. They thought it was a dead-end closet, so this access was blocked. Their exit route, following the route they used to come in, was blocked because of the collapse.
Blinded by smoke, the firefighters felt around the walls, searching for exit windows. When they couldn't find any indentations, they believed they were trapped underground. What they couldn't know, as their air supplies dwindled, was that the room had several windows, but they had been weatherproofed and covered with heavy plexiglass. The fire was too hot for other firefighters to come to their rescue, and there was no way to contact them. The 3 firefighters could not be saved. Investigators now had to determine how the fire started. ATF agents surveyed the wreckage. The majority of it was in the basement and attic. This suggested that the fire began in the basement. Then, having extinguished all combustible materials on that level, leapt up to the attic through the spaces between the walls. The absence of frayed wires or damage to the inside of the washer, dryer, water heater, or furnace dispelled the theory that the fire could have been sparked by an electrical glitch.
All the way around.
A pile of charred laundry sat in the middle of the soaked floor. When investigators turned their attention upwards, they noticed an odd burn pattern directly above the burned laundry.
Too bad that kid didn't make it out.
The marks aroused the suspicions of investigator Dan Petratus.
The joists of the ceiling were burned out in a circular pattern that was probably about 12 feet in diameter. That is unusual. So that was one of our early indicators that something occurred in the basement that wasn't typical of a naturally occurring fire.
To understand the fire's progression, the ATF team relied on a series of mathematical formulas. By plugging the values for burning textiles into the formula, Petratus determined that a pile of laundry of that size would generate 176 kilowatts of energy.
You got anything to seal this with?
Yeah,
probably 12-foot drop-off.
That figure was then factored into a flame height formula.
This is a shot down that stairwell.
It calculated that the maximum flame height would be only 2.5 feet.
It can then be placed in other...
The flame wouldn't even reach the ceiling, let alone leave such a large burn pattern.
How we could have a fire that would extend... So when we look at a particular fire scene and we interpret the patterns, then the next question we ask ourselves is, does the fuel load that we find in this room have enough energy to create the patterns that we're observing? We need a flame height.
Even if the laundry were piled up to the ceiling, it wouldn't create a great enough flame to mushroom out and ignite the joists simultaneously. But factor an accelerant into the equation, and the picture changes.
The calculator says 1,300 kilowatts.
By adding a single gallon of gasoline to the laundry pile, the flame height increases to 13 feet. This model fit the burn pattern on the ceilings and the joists. There was no way that a laundry pile could fuel a fire powerful enough to burn the ceiling unless it had been enhanced with an accelerant.
When we plug in a material that has the characteristics and energy of gasoline, then that particular material will create the patterns that we have observed.
Petratus had located the origin of the fire and determined that an accelerant had been at work there. But collecting evidence to prove his case would be difficult. Burned shreds of laundry had been soaking in water for hours. The basement floor was made of concrete. Because it's non-flammable, it doesn't yield a discernible pore pattern.
That's enough. Why don't you get that back to the lab?
If this case were to be solved, the story would be told in the lab. The ATF lab in Rockville, Maryland was called upon to analyze samples of laundry, wood, and some cement chips from the floor of the house that burned in Pittsburgh. Forensic chemist William Kennard examined the debris from the fire for traces of accelerant.
When a fireman sends us some debris, and he's looking for an accelerating compound, and he petitions us to try to find this accelerating compound from the debris that he sent in. So we use the charcoal strip method.
The test involves the insertion of a charcoal-coated strip into the canister, held in place by a magnet. The can is then heated to about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. If hydrocarbon molecules, the main compound of accelerants, are present, they are captured by the charcoal. The strip is dissolved in carbon disulfide, and the resulting solution is injected into a gas chromatograph. The instrument displays a chemical profile of the substance. Kennard then compares the pattern of peaks and valleys to a standard for evaporated gasoline. If the patterns match, gasoline is present on the sample. Kennard found remnants of the accelerant in 6 of the samples from Bryceland Street. His identification of gasoline in the pile of laundry corroborated the scenario of arson. A fire started when a pile of laundry on the basement floor had been doused with gasoline and ignited. Now, the investigation focused on finding out who did it and why.
And your name?
The ATF first questioned the homeowner, but he had nothing to gain by the destruction of his home. The ATF suspected that the Bryceland Street fire might have been gang-related, but that seemed a dead end. They then contacted Ronald and Darlene Buckner, who rented the house. The focus soon turned to the Buckner's daughter, Catherine.
When we looked into her background, she had been involved with 2 other residents in the past year and a half that had basement fires. So she became a very strong suspect, and we considered her for probably 6 to 7 months of investigation before she was eliminated as the suspect.
As they continued their investigation, the ATF learned that the Buckners aspired to buy a house. In the summer of 1994, Ronald and Darlene had gone to look at homes with several real estate agents. In October of that year, they inquired several times about purchasing houses, but were turned down each time because they couldn't afford a down payment. In November, after 5 years without coverage, the Buckners took out a renter's insurance policy on the Bryceland Street house. Only 3 months later, the house was gutted by fire. The insurance company paid $20,000 on their claim. What the company failed to notice was that the day after the fire, the Buckners resumed their house hunting with new enthusiasm. As soon as they received a check from the insurance company, they put a down payment on a new house, one that they'd been eyeing since the previous year. A motive was taking shape. Investigators grew increasingly suspicious of Darlene Buckner and her son, Gregory Brown. Darlene said that on the night of the fire, she and Gregory had gone grocery shopping. They returned to find her house engulfed in flames. Yet neighbors had seen Gregory Brown standing outside his home, watching it burn. even before emergency crews were on the scene. Another neighbor had seen Darlene driving her car near the grocery store alone that night. Shortly after the fire, Gregory had been arrested on drug charges. He had served 90 days. ATF agents interviewed his cellmates. They told the ATF that Gregory bragged about setting the fire that killed 3 people and landed his family in a new house.
Actually showing that the temperature...
The ATF filed charges against Gregory Brown and Darlene Buckner. All the scientific evidence pointed to arson. Fire setters unleash a force far beyond their control. By dropping a match in a gasoline-soaked pile of laundry, Gregory Brown set in motion a chain of events that claimed 3 lives. The jury found Gregory Brown guilty of 3 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of arson, and insurance fraud. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison. Darlene Buckner was found guilty of insurance fraud, but was acquitted of the other charges. She was sentenced to 3 years and probation and fined $5,000. Defying the arsonist's intentions, a history of the crime is forever etched in the scorched and blistered rubble left behind. Through computer modeling, trained dogs, chemical analysis, and astute observation, forensic investigators are able to reconstruct the crime and read the story from its ashes.
A day that began with a class field trip ended with a parent's worst nightmare. Family and friends worked with local police and the FBI in an urgent search for a missing daughter. An unlikely suspect eventually emerged in the girl's disappearance. Faced with conflicting testimony, the FBI would need to rely on forensic evidence to convict a predator.
The parents of 11-year-old Brittany Martinez knew their daughter was no runaway. But that was all they knew. Something had happened to her, something terrible. When they failed to find Brittany in their quiet Illinois neighborhood, they called the police. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI was soon brought in to grapple with conflicting witness reports, false leads, and a lack of clues. Agents wouldn't stop until they found Brittany and the truth.
Chicago, Illinois, and its surrounding suburbs are home to roughly 10 million residents of various backgrounds and income. People settled here to take advantage of Chicago's economic and cultural opportunities. Families from Chicago's nearby suburb of Elgin were no exception. At about 5 p.m. on May 8, 1997, Wendy Howlett returned to Elgin with her 5-year-old son and her 11-year-old daughter, Brittany Martinez, after enjoying the day at Chicago's Shed Aquarium. The mother of two had chaperoned her daughter's 5th grade class on a field trip to the famous institution.
She was just all excited about her field trip to the Shed Aquarium. And I had 5 of her girlfriends with me. They had a great time. They liked the sharks, the turtles. We had lunch outside, seeing the boats, seeing planes going by. Brittany just had a wonderful time.
Brittany and her friends were eager to play outside on the first warm day of spring. The 5th grader was her mother's eldest from a previous marriage. While upstairs with her son, Wendy heard her daughter call up from the street. Brittany asked if she could go to a nearby park.
I looked down the window and she was looking up, and I said, no, you can't go, because I thought she was maybe just going with one friend, and she actually went with 5, and I'm like, okay, there's a group, you can go, just be back by 6 o'clock.
All right, have fun.
The park was only 2 blocks away. Her son was too young to go with them, so Wendy offered to take him to his Aunt Pam's new house for a short visit. Since Pam lived in the neighborhood, the walk would be brief. On the way out, Wendy left Brittany a note, then bumped into her downstairs neighbor. She told him that if he saw Brittany return before 6 o'clock, her daughter had 2 options: wait for her mother upstairs or come to her Aunt Pam's house alone. 45 minutes later, Wendy had returned from Pam's without seeing Brittany. She figured she was still at the park with her friends. Wendy fixed a quick meal for her son while she waited for her brother to pick her up for work. At about 20 after 6, her husband, Scott Howlett, came home from his job. Scott would watch the kids when Wendy worked part-time in the evenings with her brother as a custodian.
And he walked in and I said, well, I got to go to work now. Brittany's at the park with her friends. And he looked at me and said, no, she's not. Her friends are outside.
Wendy's heart sank. She went to the window to check with Brittany's friends.
And they all looked up at me and said, she went on her bike to Aunt Pam's house, to where you are. I said, well, I'm home. Have you seen her since? They're like, no.
Brittany's friends said they'd returned from the park a little while ago. Wendy called her sister-in-law, Pam.
Hey, Pam? You seen Brittany? No, I seen her at the park. About half an hour ago.
But Brittany had not shown up yet. The family went off in search of her.
It wasn't normal for Brittany not to call me. From like 6 to 6:30, I'd normally know where she's at. So that was unusual to begin with for my daughter not to be in contact with me.
It also wasn't like Brittany to be out alone. In a few hours, it would be dark.
My husband left to start searching on foot, thinking maybe she could have been at this park still, on the way to Aunt Pam's or something. We didn't know. When we didn't find her by like 8 o'clock, a mother's instinct, I knew there was a problem.
Wendy called 911. Elgin patrol units were immediately dispatched. Sergeant Robert Beater of the Elgin Police Department was a detective at the time. He knew that when police respond quickly, they usually find the minor unharmed.
Anytime we receive a phone call regarding a missing child, we take it pretty seriously. Initially, we make contact with the people who call us. In every case, we normally search the residence, the person's residence, inside, just in case, cover the bases in case the person is hiding under the bed or in a closet, and that's happened in the past.
That wasn't the case with Brittany. Wendy told officers that her daughter was last seen wearing jeans, a blue t-shirt, yellow socks, and white sneakers. Police had to consider the possibility that Brittany had simply run away.
They started asking me about my daughter, and they're like, "Are you sure she's not at her friend's house?" I said, "The friends she would have been at, they're right there." They started asking me, "Are you sure she didn't run away? Was she angry? Was she mad?" I'm like, "No, we had an awesome day all day. She was with her friends, and it's not like my daughter not to notify me this long."
Investigators next questioned the Howlett's downstairs neighbor. He said that Brittany and her friends came back from the park at about 5:50, 20 minutes before Wendy had returned from her sister-in-law Pam's house. The neighbor said he gave Brittany the message from her mother. She could wait upstairs or go to her Aunt Pam's alone. According to him, Brittany seemed excited about going to see her aunt. Five minutes later, the 23-year-old neighbor said he was inside his apartment when he heard Brittany struggling to drag her bicycle up the basement stairs. He went out to give the 11-year-old a hand with her bike. Once they were on the street, Brittany thanked him and rode off toward her Aunt Pam's house. The neighbor never saw her after that. As word of Brittany's disappearance spread, more police and family members continued to gather to help in the search. At around 9 o'clock, Wendy's younger brother, Eddie Milka, pulled up. Brittany's uncle was shocked by the news. He told his worried sisters that he had also seen Brittany outside the apartment at around 6 o'clock when he had stopped by to pick up Wendy for work. He'd gone to work alone when he learned Wendy wasn't home. Milka said he would go to search for his niece at the park. Investigators continued to question people who lived close by, hoping someone had seen something that could point them in the right direction. But no one else had seen the 11-year-old on her bike after she left her house.
Neighbors were reporting no type of disturbance or any unusual activity in the neighborhood. It was a very nice day, kids out playing. There was just no signs of her being taken from the scene by force. So we were very concerned.
Brittany!
The searchers fanned out in every possible direction the fifth grader could have wandered.
Brittany!
They began in the park where Brittany and her friends had been playing. A helicopter joined overhead.
Brittany!
Other volunteers searched dumpsters and alleys in the area. Brittany and her bicycle seemed to have disappeared without a trace. As the night wore on, the searchers straggled back, weary and discouraged. Wendy remained at home, hoping for news on her daughter's whereabouts.
During that search, I wanted to go out and help search, and they advised me that I should stay home just in case she called, or maybe it could have been a ransom or whatever. So I stayed home, as hard as it was, and no phone calls, no nothing. My husband, my mom, my sisters, they were all out searching here, going to parks. They continued to search all night.
Wendy did her best to remain composed. But after 6 hours of fruitless searching, the mother was distraught.
She was very upset, very emotional, very concerned, just at wit's end, just didn't know where to turn. We tried to reassure her that, we're doing everything we can. We're not going to give up on this. We're going to keep going and going and going until we find her.
Once again, investigators turned their attention to the interior of the building for clues. In the basement, they were surprised to find Brittany's bike. The chain was unsecured. It wasn't like Brittany to leave it unlocked.
So, you heard it?
The bike was Brittany's prized possession. The neighbor told police he never saw Brittany return after she rode off.
So you hear her come down the steps normal and
Investigators believe that the bike must have been returned before 6:20 when Scott Howlett, Brittany's stepfather, came home from work. Hoping for a lead, several officers returned to the station to search the database. Illinois state law requires that all convicted child molesters register with the local police. Investigators sought past offenders whose records might point to a likely suspect.
Obviously, your number one concern would be if there's anybody in the area that could be prone to this type of behavior, taking a young child. So we naturally assume, let's cover the base with sex offenders.
They discovered that a registered sex offender was known to reside a few blocks away from the missing girl's apartment. Local officers knew the man was currently homeless and lived in his van. They also knew where he usually parked at night.
Daniels, you in there?
If the missing girl was inside, investigators didn't want to provoke him to do anything desperate. Brittany was not there. Nothing inside indicated Brittany had ever been in the van. He claimed to have no knowledge of the missing girl and gave the detectives an account of his activities that day. His alibi checked out.
Thanks. No, thank you. Have a nice night.
Officers re-interviewed family and friends in the slim hope that they might offer something new that could help. Wendy's parents, Brittany's maternal grandparents, lived a few miles away with their 20-year-old son, Eddie Milka. No one had seen Brittany since Eddie had at about 6 o'clock.
The family believed Eddie was one of the last persons to see her. We wanted to find out further information that Brittany might have relayed to him, that she was going somewhere, or maybe he dropped her somewhere or something, anything that he might have been able to tell us.
Eddie Milka appeared tired, but detectives wanted to get a more detailed statement while his memory was still fresh. When police asked him to provide one back at the station, the missing girl's uncle was offended.
He blurted out, "Why, do you guys think I took Brittany?" We're kind of taken aback by that because it was an unusual statement. We weren't accusing him of anything, we're just asking for his help.
Despite the offense and the late hour, Eddie agreed to talk to them at the station. Anything to help investigators locate Brittany.
Mind if we take a look at your car? Sure.
He also allowed police to search the car he'd been driving to quell whatever suspicions they may have had.
In that type of a search, you take a look and see if anything would draw your attention to the car. Maybe some item of clothing that she was wearing at the time. Not that we expected to find that in there, but we need to explore all avenues. There was a garbage can in the back seat of the car. There was a vacuum cleaner in the trunk of the car. And that didn't surprise us because Wendy had told us that that's what they do. She and Eddie clean places at night generally.
Eddie accompanied the police to the station. Detectives hoped he'd have the answers they needed to find his missing niece. Brittany Martinez was still out there, somewhere, and investigators didn't know if she was dead or alive. In the early morning hours of May 9th, 1997, Wendy Howlett's 11-year-old daughter, Brittany Martinez, had been missing from her Elgin, Illinois home for almost 11 hours. Extensive searches and interviews through the night had turned up no trace of the missing girl. Desperate, Wendy Howlett reached out to the community for help.
We called the Polyclass organization. They sent us information and what to do and what procedures to follow to get her picture on the internet for those missing and exploited children. We started calling any of the news channels to see if they can get her picture on TV, to see if someone maybe seen her. If one news station said no, we called the next one.
Chicago morning news programs broadcast appeals to the public to be on the lookout for the brown-haired 11-year-old. Authorities set up a hotline, hoping for the call that would lead them to Brittany. Like many in the community, Elgin Police Detective Robert Beater was deeply troubled by the case.
This investigation was particularly difficult because of it involved a small child. She was 11 years old, and actually at the time, my oldest son, was 11 years old, and it kind of hit home. When you first get these cases, 99 times out of 100, you can find the person rather quickly. So as time goes on, it just became very draining to try to determine where this person's at.
Okay, Eddie, tell me what happened that evening.
Racing against time, detectives turned to Brittany's uncle, Eddie Milka, for help. Although the 20-year-old janitor had been up all night, detectives asked him to detail what he could remember about the last time he saw his niece. He said that at around 6 p.m., he arrived to pick up Brittany's mother, Wendy, who was supposed to help him clean a building that night. Eddie recalled seeing his niece outside with her bike. He asked where her mother was. Brittany said that her mother was not home. Eddie couldn't wait for his sister. He had to be at work, so he said goodbye, hugged his niece, then left at around 6:15. He said he wasn't sure if Brittany had taken her bike inside afterwards. At about 6:45, Eddie stopped at a convenience store to buy a pack of cigarettes before work. He stayed at work until 8:30 and discovered that Brittany was missing at about 9. He had searched 2 parks that night where he knew Brittany often played. But like the rest of the family, he turned up nothing. Afterwards, he stopped by the house of some friends and admitted smoking marijuana with them. Now he was exhausted and wanted to get some sleep.
At some point in the interview, he said, "Listen, guys, you're just going to have to let me go because I don't have anything else to tell you. I'm tired. I want to go home." And at this point, it was like a 3-hour interview, and we didn't have any reason to keep him there, so then we brought him home.
With time working against them, Elgin police contacted the Chicago field office of the FBI.
That was pretty recent.
From experience, FBI Special Agent Beth Malarkey knew that if Brittany was not found in the first 24 hours, the girl's chances of survival were slim.
The initial hours are incredibly crucial. We all know in law enforcement, and having worked previous kidnapping cases, that the longer the child goes missing, the less likelihood there is of recovering the child, certainly alive. And our mission is to recover a live child.
The FBI offered local authorities additional manpower, plus a computer system that helped organize, cross-reference, and manage leads. These resources became increasingly valuable as calls flooded in.
There were hundreds of leads that were called in by the public because of a number that was disseminated to the public for anyone having information. All of those leads were cataloged and checked. People's alibis were checked.
Investigators decided to follow up on Eddie Milka's alibi as well. They spoke to the president of the company whose building Eddie was scheduled to clean the night before. The executive had worked late that night and saw no one else in the building. When he locked up at 8:15, the president's car was the only one in the lot. Investigators also checked the convenience store where Milka said he bought cigarettes. The store was equipped with a 24-hour surveillance camera. The detective scanned the video recorded on May 8th from 6 to 8 p.m. He never saw Brittany's uncle enter the store. Eddie Milka had lied about his whereabouts.
The other family members were interviewed, and what they told us turned out to be true. All their whereabouts were accounted for. Other people were able to verify their statements. Everything that Edward Milka told us turned out not to be true.
But the discovery that Milka had lied did not prove wrongdoing, nor did it put investigators any closer to finding the young girl. It had been almost 24 hours since Brittany was reported missing.
Now, can I get a copy of
Investigators continued to pursue all viable leads,
By this time, we were just getting continuous telephone leads, the citizens calling in, community calling in, assisting us with possible information. Maybe they saw her somewhere.
Witnesses reported seeing Brittany in many locations throughout the region, including a restaurant. The police dispatched officers to check each sighting. The public and investigators alike clung to hope that Brittany was still alive. Each time officers responded, they were disappointed. Police found only conflicting stories and unconfirmed accounts. By the end of the first day, investigators were forced to consider the possibility that they were no longer looking for a live victim. May 10th, 1997, marked the second day that Elgin, Illinois police and the FBI searched for missing 11-year-old Brittany Martinez. Since Brittany had now been missing for over 36 hours, the possibility that she had met a violent end became more likely. The last person to have seen her was her uncle, Eddie Milka. Elgin detective Robert Beater could not eliminate Milka as a suspect.
Eddie Milka was always a question. It was always a question on his behavior. It was always a question on his statements that he told us. And all the other leads that we were getting in, they were quickly resolved.
But no one had seen Milka talking to Brittany outside her home, as Milka himself had claimed.
Thanks.
Elgin police detective Brian Gorkowski realized that unless Brittany or her body was recovered, investigators had no physical evidence that she'd been harmed.
We suspected that this was a kidnapping maybe at some point or a child abduction, but again, we had no tangible things to say, this is a murder. We had no body. We had no smoking gun, if you will. That was very difficult for me.
On the morning of May 10th, Detective Gorkowski received a page from Brittany's mother, Wendy. She said that her brother, Eddie Milka, wanted to talk to police again.
We wanted to re-interview Eddie Milka. We wanted him to come in and talk to us voluntarily, and if he did do that, we wanted as much information about his background, his past, as we could gather. So we were very pleased that she did give us this background.
Wendy Howlett described Eddie as slow. He had attended a special high school for the learning disabled. As far as she knew, Eddie had few friends and no girlfriends. Investigators met with the 20-year-old in the police department's family interview room.
You all right? Okay, yes.
They asked him what he wanted to tell them. The detectives were pleased by Eddie Milka's response.
Milka told us he had lied. Initially, right off the bat in the beginning of this conversation, and that he was now going to tell us the truth. Well, at that point, I got a little excited because I like when someone I'm going to interview tells me they lied. Because at that point, I know that we can get everything behind us, we can start getting the truth out, we can be open, there can be some honest dialogue between the two of us.
He admitted that when he saw Brittany, he was under the influence of marijuana. But he maintained that he had left his niece in front of her apartment at about 6:15 when he drove off to work. Milka told detectives that when he pulled into work, he saw his boss's car and wanted to avoid him since he was high. He claimed that he didn't enter the office building until 8:15 when his boss left. Detectives knew this version couldn't be true.
We confronted him with the workplace lie. You weren't in the workplace at 8:15 p.m. We know that because the owner said there was no one inside that business when he had left. Milka told us, you might be right. There may be some time difference here.
But Milka didn't elaborate. If he knew where Brittany was, he wasn't forthcoming. Investigators tried a new tack.
Let's take our time.
I asked him to imagine where Brittany was at this point in time because he was the last one to see her. He began to rub his temples, he closed his eyes, and then he said she was in Elgin, then she was near Elgin, that she was cold and wet. He continued to reiterate that constantly. We asked if she was breathing. He said that she was not. We asked if she was bleeding. He told us no, she wasn't bleeding.
Milka asked for a cigarette.
I know she's dead.
He started pacing and mumbling, then asked the detective to write down what he was about to say. Milka claimed he was having a vision of Brittany in an old gray car with two men who were drinking beer. He also saw farmhouses, a dirt road, gravel, rocks, and a creek. He added that the men had touched her all over, but he didn't stop there.
After he had told me that he had seen these two males touching Brittany, he then told me, I know she's dead, I want to tell my sister she's dead, grabbed me, hugged me, and began to cry.
Eddie?
Wendy Howard was called down to the station. She noticed her brother had been crying and asked what he had to tell her. Once again, Eddie Milka changed his story.
He just looked up at me and said, I didn't do it. I don't, they're putting things in my head. I just want to go home. I just want to go home. They're telling me Brittany's dead. Brittany's still alive. We got to find her.
Since Milka never admitted any wrongdoing in his vision statement, police had nothing to hold him on. Wendy took her brother home. Investigators questioned the two friends Milka said he had smoked marijuana with on the day Brittany disappeared. They confirmed that they'd been with Eddie until 10 minutes to 6 when he left for work. Milka told them that he would be back later to watch the Bulls game. When he returned at approximately 10:30 that night, Milka was upset and crying. He told them that his niece Brittany was missing. They then drank a few beers and watched the rest of the Bulls game. Eddie left their house at about 1 a.m. The friends had nothing more to add. Investigators still had no evidence that Milka had abducted Brittany, and no clue as to where she might be now.
And then, a week goes by and we still haven't determined what happened to her. She could have been found somewhere. She could have been taken and then released. And that's how some of these cases work out. Some of the more dangerous ones, the person takes them and then releases them a later time.
On May 17th, 1997, 9 days after Brittany disappeared, a couple was boating on the Kishwaukee River, 18 miles outside of Elgin, when they made a grisly discovery. They found the body of a girl washed up on a sandbar. She was naked from the waist up and severely decomposed. The terrified couple made for shore and then ran to call the police. On May 17th, 1997, 9 days after 11-year-old Brittany Martinez was reported missing from her Elgin, Illinois home, a young girl's body was discovered 18 miles away in the Kishwaukee River. Lieutenant Gene Lowry of the McHenry County Sheriff's Department investigated.
At the time, we weren't sure if it was Brittany Martinez or not. I knew from screening the missing cases that come through our jurisdiction at the Sheriff's Department, we didn't have any missing females that would be within that age range. So we began to look outside of our jurisdiction and other police agencies to determine what, if any, missing persons might fit that description.
The nearby Elgin police and FBI were called in to determine if the dead girl was Brittany. FBI Special Agent Beth Malarkey believed they had finally found her.
Those of us who were involved in the investigation and knew the description of Brittany, what she looked like, what her hair looked like, the clothes that she was wearing when she was missing. Although the body that was found on the sandbar was missing a t-shirt, the rest of it very much resembled Brittany Martinez. The dark hair, the blue jeans, the socks, and the tennis shoes that she was wearing.
It was impossible to visually identify the victim or to immediately determine how she had died. Investigators could see no external wounds.
Long time.
They believed she had likely been killed elsewhere than dumped in the river.
Too much.
You know, what
A little bit.
The mood amongst the investigators was grim.
It just became very sad because the reality of having a dead child and the investigation changing from a missing child to possibly a murdered child changed the whole tone of the investigation.
The surrounding area struck Detective Brian Gorkowski as similar to the place Eddie Milka had described earlier in his vision statement.
The scene of the Kishwaukee River at that point seems more like a creek or a small body of water, not necessarily what you would picture a river to be. There were rocks, there was dirt roads in the area, there was farmhouses. The landscape very much depicted what Eddie had told me in the vision statement.
To confirm that Milka's vision statement was not a coincidence, they needed proof that could link him to this location. The FBI's evidence recovery team, specialists in crime scene forensics, were called in. It was the same unit that sifted through the debris of Pan Am Flight 103 and the Oklahoma City bombing.
The ERT is very highly trained and professional and organized in how they conduct crime scene searches. And because this looked like a murder investigation at this point, every piece of evidence was going to be extremely important.
The forensic technicians took soil, water, and plant samples, as well as samples of the insects that had colonized the body. Based on the development of these larvae, scientists determined that the victim died no later than 2 p.m. on May 9th, the day after Brittany disappeared. That night, Wendy Howlett prayed it wasn't Brittany.
I still was trying to keep hope that it wasn't my daughter. And I was hoping it was no one else. It was someone's little girl, but I was hoping it wasn't mine.
2 days later, dental records confirmed that the remains were, in fact, those of Brittany Martinez. A forensic pathologist determined that she had died of asphyxiation. 2 strips of tape were removed from her face and mouth. A large bruise with scalloped edges was found on her cheek. To investigators, it resembled a bite mark. The examiner noted that Brittany's jeans were only half zipped and her underwear was on inside out. He found 2 lacerations on the hymen. The pathologist concluded that the 5th grader had been sexually assaulted immediately before or at the time of her death. It would take several more months to process Brittany's clothing and tissue samples at the FBI lab. Special Agent Malarkey wanted to make sure that the analysis was thorough.
I have to say that I didn't sleep for several days after that because seeing her, seeing the state that she was in, and understanding the magnitude of what took place.
Detective Robert Beater hoped the discovery of Brittany's body and clothing would provide the physical evidence they needed to catch her killer.
When it was final, at that point we could notify the families and really start digging our heels and focusing on some of the evidence we had already recovered.
For the past 11 days, Wendy Howlett had nourished the hope that her child was still alive. Now, that hope was dashed. The Howletts' worst fears had come true.
When they told me that it was my daughter, it is the worst feeling that you ever want to know. I can't even describe the pain that it goes through because that was my only girl. And I wish this upon no one. Not even my worst enemy do I wish this upon. And like an hour after my daughter, they confirmed that it was her, I went into her room and started breaking things. And then I got even more upset because I was breaking her things and I still was hoping she was alive, even though I knew she wasn't.
Investigators speculated on why Brittany's body had come to rest in a river 18 miles from her home. Lieutenant Gene Lowry asked Brittany's mother if the location seemed significant.
And at that time, she had indicated that her father was an employee of the Milwaukee Railroad and had since been retired or disabled, and the family spent many summers at the Railroad Museum in Union, Illinois, a very, very short distance from where Brittany Martinez's body was found.
Eddie Milka had spent time there as well. Investigators secured a warrant for samples of his blood, saliva, and hair. They were forwarded to the FBI lab so examiners could begin the lengthy work of DNA mapping. Milka's genetic profile would be ready for comparison to any foreign DNA recovered from Brittany or her clothing. A forensic dentist also took impressions of Milka's teeth. Investigators suspected the mold would match the bite mark found on Brittany's cheek. The dentist compared the cast to a blown-up photo of the indentations on the victim's face. The two appeared to match. But due to advanced decomposition, the bite mark was distorted, so the dentist could not be absolutely certain Milka's teeth had made the mark. The results were inconclusive. Authorities still lacked the physical evidence needed to make an arrest. They obtained a warrant to search the impounded Lincoln town car they believed Milka had used to drive Brittany to the river. Soil samples collected from the wheel wells were found to be too common to prove where the car had been. Investigators hoped something on the inside would be more promising. Among the clutter in the back seat, agents found a paper cup from a fast food restaurant. Its lid was stained red with what appeared to be blood. The lid also held a partial palm print that matched Eddie Milka's. Brittany's fingerprint, along with her mother's, were found as well. Matted in the fibers of the backseat floor mat, they found more red stains. Agents secured samples of fibers from the floor mat and upholstery. More than 140 items were collected from the car and forwarded to the growing caseload at the FBI lab. Since the lab would take months to complete tests, Lieutenant Lowry asked Brittany's relatives to recall if anyone had been injured inside the car. Brittany's maternal grandmother, Milka, remembered that the 11-year-old had had a nosebleed in the car on the day of a family outing. Brittany's other grandmother said she was also there that day but did not recall the incident.
The Milka family painted it as, yes, there was a bloody nose in the vehicle, and these circumstances occurred. The other side of the family painted a dramatically different picture, that there was absolutely no evidence of a bloody nose.
Family members on the two sides were lining up against each other. The Milkas believed that Eddie could not have killed Brittany.
The hardest part of this investigation is the fact that our suspect was a family member. That obviously causes family problems when you suspect another family member of being the suspect in a case. That became difficult to overcome because we wanted the family's cooperation, and it's difficult for the family to keep cooperating when one of their own becomes a suspect.
Though circumstantial evidence pointed to Eddie Milka, contradictory stories and no confirmed physical evidence meant that investigators might never be able to charge Brittany's uncle with her murder. By early December 1997, 6.5 months had passed since the body of 11-year-old Brittany Martinez was discovered in a river 18 miles from her home. Her uncle, 20-year-old Eddie Milka, was the prime suspect and agreed to provide tissue samples, though his side of the family believed he was not responsible. Without substantial physical evidence, it would be difficult for the FBI and local investigators to charge him with murder. Examiners at the FBI crime lab in Washington, D.C. had spent months sifting through hundreds of pieces of trace evidence collected during the investigation. Karen Lanning, a scientist in the FBI's Trace Evidence Unit, received Brittany's clothing and coordinated the examination.
The evidence was processed in one of our scraping rooms, which is a room where we put the items of evidence. Victims and suspects are kept separately. Items from a scene are in a separate room so that we're not contaminating anything.
Lanning examined Brittany's socks, underwear, and jeans. Each item was scraped in the search for hairs or fibers foreign to the clothing. On the inside of the jeans, the examiner discovered one thin nylon fiber, a fiber distinctly different from the denim. She would compare the questioned fiber to a known sample from the carpet in Milka's car. The fibers matched. In 4 additional tests, her results were the same. Investigators theorized that Brittany had been in Milka's car with her jeans removed, since the carpet fiber was found inside of her jeans. But the fiber match alone was not enough to prove the theory, since that type of fiber was common to many cars.
I couldn't say the fiber came from that carpeting as opposed to another carpeting just like it. So if there were 2 cars that were the same, I can't say it's from car A versus car B.
Investigators hoped the remaining evidence would prove more conclusive. Special Agent Melissa Smers, chief of the Mitochondrial DNA Unit 2 at the FBI laboratory, was a serology and nuclear DNA examiner at the time. It was her task to determine if any of the victims' or suspects' fluids were present on the evidence. She found Brittany's clothing too contaminated to test.
Brittany had been dead for approximately 9 days before she was found. Because of that, she had started to decompose, and the clothing that she had on her showed evidence of that decomposition.
Agent Smers instead focused on the red stains found on the fast food cup and carpet taken from Milka's car. She determined that the stains were human blood. Through DNA testing, she'd find out whose. The examiner compared known samples of Eddie Milka's and Brittany's DNA to that found on the cup and carpet. Agent Smers concluded that the blood in the car had come from Brittany. The probability that someone else had bled on the cup was at least 6.4 million to 1. It was enough to issue a warrant for Eddie Milka's arrest. On December 18, 1997, over 7 months after Brittany disappeared, Eddie Milka was charged with murder, aggravated kidnapping, and predatory criminal assault of a child. His arrest took his sister Wendy Howlett by surprise.
I not only lost my daughter, I am now losing my brother to something I know he didn't do. And I was more stunned and in shock than anything that, you know, this can't be happening. This nightmare's got to end somewhere.
In order to protect her brother, Wendy Howlett said that it was unlikely that Eddie would have driven to the river in McHenry County since he had never been there before. She told Lieutenant Gene Lowry that the railroad museum the Milkas went to as kids was not in that area as she had previously stated.
Wendy began to change her story for whatever reason and backed off on that statement. That again forced us to re-interview her and try and determine, where she was in regard to that statement, because it would be key in determining what the connection was to McHenry County.
James McAuliffe of the McHenry County State's Attorney's Office knew the trial would be difficult. 2 of the key witnesses, Eddie's sister Wendy and Eddie's mother, would testify on the suspect's behalf.
I have those expert reports.
We had to impeach some very sympathetic people for whom our hearts went out, but we had no alternative because they had changed their story so much. So we had to in effect, attack our own witnesses and members of the family who had suffered such a terrible loss. It made it extremely difficult for us. It made it extremely difficult for the Milka and Howlett family and all the members who testified.
On April 21st, 2000, nearly 3 years after Brittany's death, the case of the state versus Edward Milka went to trial. The prosecution called more than 50 witnesses. In closing arguments, prosecutors told the jury how they believed the murder had taken place. They believed Eddie Milka had helped Brittany return her bike to the basement. In her haste, she left it unlocked, but took the cup she'd carried since coming home from her field trip. In the past, Brittany had sometimes accompanied her mother and uncle on cleaning jobs to help pay for the bike she loved so much. The prosecution believed Eddie drove to a nearby forest preserve after he saw his boss's car parked at work. There, prosecutors contended, he sexually assaulted his niece and likely smothered her until she died, then dumped her body in the Kishwaukee River.
The defendant, Edward Milka.
The jury was not convinced Eddie Milka had planned to kill Brittany.
When the jury retired and they came back, they entered a finding of not guilty on the first-degree murder. They felt that he had not intentionally murdered his niece.
Felony murder.
On the second charge of murder while in commission of a felony sexual assault, the jury found Edward Milka guilty. Many investigators, including Lieutenant Lowry, sympathized with Wendy Howlett's loss. The verdict provided little comfort to her family.
This is a tragedy, a human tragedy. There's no other way to cut it. As a father, I can tell you, if I had to experience this, I don't know if I could survive it. So for her as a mother, my heart goes out to her.
Edward Milka was sentenced to 75 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. His crime tore a close family apart. When young Brittany was killed, no one could hear her scream. But with the FBI's forensic experts on the trail, the story of Brittany's final hours could be told. And her killer brought to justice.
State Park is almost all woods.
It was really kind of a spooky place.
When we arrived at cabin 13, it appeared that there was a real serious struggle going on there.
Somebody killed her. I just could not fathom that someone had actually killed her. To look back and see all these clues that I missed, that I just didn't see.
There was a male subject in the photos that appeared to be in various stages of undress.
His story didn't add up.
That night wasn't a lot of traffic out, nothing going on. So I decided to go have dinner. As soon as I walked in, I got the radio call. There was a individual that called in from Babcock State Park. He said several individuals had broken into his cabin and attacked him and his wife. So I was on my way. When I arrived on scene, there was the headquarters building, and that's where the call came from. He was there at the telephone, and the only thing he had on was a pair of brief white underwear. His legs were scratched.
I called for help. Please don't hurt me, please.
As I approached him, he was very hysterical.
I need help.
I said, calm down. I'm a police officer. I'm here to help you, not hurt you. Asked him if he knew who he was. He told me he was Mr. Flippo. He had advised me at that time that his wife was still at the cabin. I asked him which cabin were you at. He said cabin number 13. So I told him to go with me. I placed him in my cruiser. I asked him what had happened. He had told me that several people had been there. They had attacked him and his wife. The distance between the headquarters building and cabin 13 is probably about 7/10 of a mile down a one-lane road. When we arrived at cabin 13, there was a Camaro sitting on the left-hand side of the road across from the cabin. Had looked like a white T-shirt or something hanging off the side view mirror. And I said, did you arrive in this car? He said, no, I don't know who owns that car. I said, do you remember how you got here? He gave me very good details of his green Cadillac. There was no green Cadillac anywhere around. I told him to remain seated in the vehicle, and I was going to check the cabin. It had been raining that night, so it was kind of slippery. I didn't know what I was walking in on. I thought there were several people inside the cabin. I thought there was going to be a fight.
Hello?
I yelled in the county sheriff's office. Is anyone in there? There's no response. I looked over at the bed. There was a large blood stain on the bed. And I seen a lady laying between the bed and the wall. A lot of blood. At that point, I walked back out, went back to my cruiser, got on the radio, and called for other assistance. And an ambulance. I'm trying to keep Mr. Flippo calm until I can get medical attention for him. Once the ambulance got there, one attendant took care of Mr. Flippo, and me and the other ambulance attendant went over and checked his wife.
Michael Flippo's wife, Cheryl Flippo, was deceased.
You never think anything like this will happen. She was a beautiful person, and she brought joy to many people and to us. We grew up in southern West Virginia. There was 7 of us children.
We lived in a little coal mining community that had like 22 houses. We went to church about every Sunday.
Cheryl, as far back as I can remember, she always was very devoutly religious.
When we reached high school, you know, thinking about your future and what you want to be. And she prayed for the Lord's direction, and she felt the Lord told her she should be a minister's wife. Michael was in college studying to go into the ministry. So when Cheryl and Mike were introduced, Cheryl was very interested because she felt the Lord works in wonderful ways. When Cheryl and Mike got married, Cheryl was 19 and Michael was a few years older. She glowed. She was so happy. Cheryl and Mike had been living in Nitro, West Virginia, for about 15 years.
The kings of the armies, they flee.
Michael Flippo was a pastor at a Church of God in Nitro.
He was a typical Church of God minister. He spoke in tongues. He did his altar calls.
Gave the command. Great is the tidings of those.
Cheryl absolutely took her role as a pastor's wife extremely seriously. She felt that they were like a couple in their ministry as well as a couple in their marriage. She was constantly doing things for the church, for people in the church.
She had lots of roles in the church. She was part of the women's group. She was youth leader, Sunday school teacher. I mean, she did all different kinds of roles that Michael needed her to fill. And Cheryl loved those things.
Dave was always busy going to church, going to hospitals, and going to people's houses.
Michael said that they were just riding around, and on the spur of the moment, they decided that they would like to spend the night at Babcock, where they could have a romantic evening.
Michael Flippo rented cabin 13 in Babcock State Park.
Babcock State Park is almost all woods. I think many people would go to Babcock for seclusion.
They have hiking trails and cabins that are built along the creek that runs through there.
It's very quiet. Normally, not a whole lot goes on at nighttime.
When I first got there, I met up with Sergeant Bryant, and he gave me a brief rundown of meeting Flippo.
The police had to tell him that his wife was dead. He was sad and grieving, but they still had to ask him questions as they were moving forward with the investigation.
Michael Flippo was confused, incoherent at times. The statement that he gave was they had a pleasant evening, eating ice cream and eating snacks. Then they retired for the evening. He stated that this intruder had broke into the cabin while he and Cheryl were sleeping and attacked them both. In her final moments of life, how much fear she must have suffered at that point. Michael Flippo told us this intruder just hit him in the middle of the night. And while he was knocked down on the floor, the intruder had got on his legs to hold him down, facing him, and took a knife, cutting his legs.
He was unconscious for a period of time. Then when he came to, he went over, he checked his wife.
He says he put his head down on his wife's chest and he could hear her heartbeat.
He had told me he couldn't find a cell phone. So he ran out the door and he ran to use the payphone at headquarters. It was obvious what had happened to her. What wasn't obvious was who did it. And that is the thing that we have to find out. I left Garland with the house, let him process it. Early morning hours next morning. The area was searched.
Babcock State Park is huge. Most of the park is wooded. The police start looking for that someone to check to see if he was out there.
I placed an officer up at the mouth of the road, so if anybody left the area, we'd know about it. Every camp was checked. We went to the cabin, talked to the individual that was there, asked them if they heard anything. Told them to stay inside the cabin until somebody says it's okay to come out.
No one who was near cabin 13 heard or saw anything.
We were trying to collect evidence as quickly as possible. I obtained the license plate and had a registration check for the Camaro. Now we wanted to start processing the crime scene before we did anything. There was a table with various items on it. Cheryl's purse was there. A briefcase was there. There was a bloody fingerprint that was discovered in the bathroom window on the inside roll of the duct tape. It appeared that there was a real serious struggle going on there. You could see the blood splatter on the wall. Various items turned over. The bedding had been pulled down to the foot of the bed.
As Garlenberg processed the whole scene, he did find a piece of wood that he believed was the murder weapon.
Cheryl Flippo had taken a severe beating. To think that someone could mutilate a human body like that, it's hard to forget.
I drove up to my mom's because my kids were staying there. And when I opened the door, I heard Pamela screaming.
Cheryl's son had called and said that Cheryl was dead, that she had been murdered. And I was like, shocked. Cheryl's dead. And Michael is in the hospital.
I just remember saying, somebody killed her. Somebody killed her. Really? Somebody killed her? I just could not fathom it, that someone had actually killed her.
My immediate reaction was to think that this had to be a mistake. Who would do that to Cheryl? I would have thought she would have been the last person that anyone would want to hurt, period.
Flippo was being treated at the hospital. There was a small wound to his forehead, and he got struck in the back of the head and some cuts on his leg. Very, very minor. So he got released from the hospital. He was transported to the sheriff's department where they performed a more in-depth interview. When he was questioned about who could do this to you, Michael Flippo appeared scared. He said someone was communicating threats to him.
He said, somebody's stalking me. The stalker was in and out of their lives, and now he was back.
Many years before Cheryl's murder, Michael Flippo had made several reports concerning this alleged stalker.
Cheryl called to tell us that they thought somebody was following Michael and had threatened him.
We all knew that there was somebody doing some strange things around their house.
The stalker was even entering his house and leaving notes taped in various locations.
The notes were made from cutting letters out of magazines and gluing them on paper.
Cheryl would come home and find a note someplace. And it would say, you know, I'm watching you, I'm after you, I'm gonna get you, stuff like that.
The notes were very brief, but they indicated that someone was trying to hurt them. The idea that the stalker could come into their home and do that and disappear, that was very scary. I do remember telling Cheryl, you guys should not be alone. It seems like when you're alone, that's when you're more at risk. Cheryl did at one point tell her friend, I believe somebody's trying to kill me.
We also learned about an incident at the church in Nitro.
Michael had been in the church,
And right after he left, the church caught fire.
the thought was the stalker was in there and the stalker was the one that set the fire.
They were very scared. Cheryl didn't feel safe.
The FBI got involved and the house was staked out.
The Nitro police took this very seriously, and I know that they were at that home and the church on several occasions. Michael began to tell his church family, Cheryl, and the Nitro police that he was once again being stalked. He reported to the police that among the many things that would indicate the stalker was there was this note that said, April showers bring May flowers to your grave.
Most of the congregation had a plan to protect them. Men from the church would come in and stay with Michael and Cheryl to make sure that nothing happened.
Michael said the stalker left a message on the answering machine saying, I tried to kill you 8 years ago and failed, but I won't this time.
He was the one that went into that cabin to commit this heinous crime. We had been at the cabin all day. It took so long to process the crime scene. We wanted to preserve and to collect evidence slowly, meticulously. There was a briefcase laying on the table. There was some papers in there that had Michael Flippo's name and address on there. There was an envelope that appeared to have photos in it. There was a male subject in the photos that appeared to be in various stages of undress. The man was standing by a car, taking off his pants.
The police have no idea who this man is in those pictures and no idea of his relationship to the Flippos.
We went to Nitro to talk to the members of the church. The members of the congregation were very leery about talking to law enforcement.
They loved their pastor, they loved their pastor's wife. The people of the church felt loyal to the Flippos.
We actually rented a motel to interview the ones that would cooperate, but would only come in the early morning hours of darkness so that they could keep from being seen. When we interviewed some of the congregants, we determined the person in the photograph was an individual by the name of Joel. Joel was a friend of Michael Flippo's. He was a young adult. I believe he was 25 years old.
I knew a little about Joel. Michael was trying to counsel him and provide spiritual guidance.
Michael started hanging out with Joel quite a bit.
He had been trying to work out some kind of land deal with Joel, and they were going to go into some kind of business together. Cheryl was very anxious. She just seemed stressed. She had her reservations about it.
I don't think she ever really trusted Joel.
One particular couple informed us about the close relationship that Joel and Michael Flippo had developed. They said that strange things were happening in church, and that Joel had even started occupying the seat that Cheryl Flippo normally occupied in church.
That made her uncomfortable. She didn't understand that. Michael was gone a lot. And she seemed extra nervous about why he was gone.
We learned through the investigation that Michael Flippo and Joel had went to a ski resort. They were together for the weekend and spent the night together in one room.
I'm sure a lot of Michael's behavior disturbed her, and I'm sure her gut was telling her things weren't right.
When the stalker thing got really bad, she also told me that Joel was staying in their house. I said, Cheryl, why would Joel be staying in your house? I know you have some concerns about him. And she said Michael brought him into the house because he was an expert with a gun. So that would offer them some protection if somebody tried to harm them.
They found Michael Flippo's diaries on the computer at Flippo's church. Several years earlier, a member of the congregation had installed the computer at the church. And Flippo asked him to include a journal program so the congregant knew the diary existed, and he went to find it. Flippo talks about men and his frustrations about his sexuality.
In his diary, he says, I love Joel. He also says, I'm not a homosexual, but I feel like I would like to have a man put his arms around me. And for us, that was pretty shocking.
We were like, what? Just mind-boggling. What? We thought we knew Michael.
The member of the church was pretty disturbed when he read it, and he gave it to the investigators.
It kind of seems like he was living the double life.
So we wanted to get as much information about the marriage as possible. Inside Cheryl's Bible, which was located inside the cabin, was a letter that had been written to Michael Flippo.
In Cheryl's letter, she was clearly expressing frustration. She said something like, I'm so tired of going to bed punished. She said, I do love you, but I hate this competition that you've created. And one of the things he said in the letters, too, is, why can't I have a friend? His idea that he would have to have this friendship in secret didn't sit well with him at all. It's clear from her letters she wanted him to put her above Joel, but She didn't feel like that's what Michael was doing.
And then the results of the registration check made on the license plate for the Camaro came back registered to Joel.
It was becoming pretty clear that the police had serious questions about the relationship between the two men. So they called Joel to come and speak to them. Joel denied that he had any involvement with the murder. He clearly stated it was his car, but he was not there. And he said that Flippo was threatened by a stalker and wanted to get away. So he volunteered to give his red Camaro to the couple. Joel did say to the police that on April 27th, just a few days before the murder, he and Flippo visited Babcock State Park and just drove around. He's the one that told Flippo, get cabin 13. He had been to that park many times since he was a kid. He liked the park very much. Joel had always wanted to be baptized at this park. So they found a spot where they could pull over and do this baptism. Joel explained that those photos record the time after the baptism, changing from wet clothes into dry clothes, and that Flippo took the pictures to capture a happy moment. Joel said he and Michael Flippo were absolutely just friends. And when he was asked about the marriage, he thought that Flippo and his wife had a good marriage. The police were trying to figure out, was it Joel? Is he telling the truth?
When he was questioned again, Flippo said that he had borrowed Joel's car to be in somewhat of a disguise so that this stalker couldn't follow them.
Every time that police asked Michael Flippo who the murderer would have been, he continued to say it was the stalker.
He could never describe this stalker. He can't give a physical description.
We were beginning to be suspicious of what had happened. So we wanted to see the cabin.
It was really kind of a spooky place. Just eerie and so isolated.
I felt Cheryl. I felt Cheryl's presence. I remember sitting down at a table that was there, and I could feel her just wash over me.
Just was one of the worst feelings you could ever get. Walking in there and knowing that that's the last thing that she ever saw was inside of that cabin. It was brutal.
Now we wanted to go back and look at the photographs in case we missed something with the naked eye. At first impression, the attack occurred in the bed. But when I looked at the blood pool on the floor, you could see where something had been dragged through the blood.
It seemed like someone picked up a pillow, sopped it up with the blood on the floor, and put it on the bed. Someone was trying to make it look like Mrs. Flippo died in the bed instead of on the floor.
When you're looking at the rocking chair turned over, it would give the impression that there was a struggle. You start looking closely, there was clothing neatly stacked underneath the rocking chair. Then I noticed that footprints were very evident at the cabin.
It was extremely rainy that night. If you got off the walkway at all, you got mud on your feet.
You could see Charlie Bryant's footprints and the footprints of the medic that was going in. So you're looking then and you're thinking, where is this third person? In my opinion, Michael Flippo couldn't describe this stalker because there was no stalker involved. This was a staged crime scene. It started becoming evident at that point that Michael Flippo was no longer a victim, but he was a suspect.
When Officer Burke looked back at the church fire several years earlier, he learned the fire chief suspected it was arson from the beginning.
I think he learned that you can get money from insurance.
He kept saying they needed a new church. They needed a new church. And that old church burnt down and they got a brand new church.
I mean, it's too coincidental. Burn, 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 burn.
Our investigation also revealed a background of embezzling money.
Just before the murder, there was a child who desperately needed a liver and pancreas transplant. Everybody rallied around this family, and ultimately they raised almost $90,000. Flippo opened an account for the child with only his name on it, and he was dipping into that account. There was around $12,000 missing. Flippo took that money and he was never held to account.
He always liked expensive things, always liked to impress people. It'd always been about money.
Cheryl was determined that they would live with a budget and save money for their retirement, which was not Michael's plan.
We discovered a life insurance policy had been taken out.
He had made this life insurance policy, making himself the sole beneficiary, and if Cheryl would die, he would get $100,000.
The insurance policy was taken out in the name of Cheryl Flippo on March 1st, and it went into effect April 1st. The pieces of the puzzle started coming together.
His story didn't add up. He did this.
We actually got a search warrant to have his body examined. So we took Michael Flippo to the medical examiner. He checked the wounds and the way the striations were on his leg. They were self-inflicted in this case. The curve of the wound is one of the things you look at. And from observing the wounds on his leg, we could determine the wounds were self-inflicted, and then the results from the bloody thumbprint on the duct tape came back matched to Michael Flippo.
By that point, investigators believed they had a complete picture of what led to her murder. On April 27th, after Joel and Michael visited Babcock State Park, Flippo reserved cabin 13.
He brought her to cabin 13 because it was a secluded area.
You could do about anything and nobody had known about it.
What I think occurred was that Cheryl and Michael had laid down in her mind to go to sleep and have a restful evening. And Michael started striking her with the piece of firewood.
can't imagine what went through her head at that point. It's the worst kind of betrayal.
The scene was made to look like the stalker came in and had a big struggle with Michael Flippo and harmed him.
He fled the scene. He made his cover story that removed him from any guilt.
Come on, Lord.
The day before Cheryl Flippo's funeral, we went to Nitro and arrested Flippo. That was a very satisfying moment to me.
Michael Flippo was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife.
You fought for justice for her. You wouldn't have been able to live without justice for her. But it didn't make the pain go away.
We never got a confession. We never heard anything other than the fabrication he told us up front.
We did debate whether or not anybody else was involved.
But when we sat and listened to Garland Burke tell us that he was at that cabin for 5, 6, 7 days, he could not find a molecule or a hair sample or a blood spatter or anything that did not belong to those two people.
The only piece of evidence that even connected Joel was the use of his car that Michael Flippo had driven to Babcock.
I thought I was good in judging people. And to look back and see all these clues that I missed, that I just didn't see. There was no stalker.
Michael was the stalker.
Every time Michael would get into trouble, he would say the stalker was after him.
It was like his ace in the hole, you might say.
For a preacher, I think he was very devious.
He betrayed all those people, not just us and her and his family. He betrayed all those people that he supposedly was ministering to. In my mind, you know, it's like she paid the price for his sins. And how is that right?
Cheryl was our angel on earth. She wasn't perfect, but she was our angel on earth. She was the heart of our family. So to lose that for us was insurmountable. I feel the pain as much today as I did in 1996.
We had to move on. We did our own things. It was extremely hard to do it without her. It was for me. Life goes on for us. It will never be the same, but at least you have the solace of knowing that you'll never be able to do it to anyone else.
We had a cabin on Stump Island. I'm not saying that evil things were happening, but it was a creepy, creepy space.
There were rumors galore. They were concerned that you have a serial killer in your community.
That cabin holds an awful lot of secrets.